This is how I used to explain the process. I used to explain to teachers and to parents that when you cannot read the language, you feel as if there is a wall between the learner and the language. There is a high wall. There are many blocks that block the way to learn the language. My student who cannot read cannot see the language, cannot relate to the language, cannot remember the language. If you remember the heart, you cannot remember how to say I love you in other languages unless you write it down. And again and again and again, of course, there are people who can learn only from hearing, only from watching TV series. I'm not talking about them. And still, yet, even those need to be able to read and write, because as we know, it's part of our education. Not to be able to read means to be illiterate. So going back to the wall is the blockage between the learner and the success in learning the language. Once they learn to read, they refer to the mushrooms, like mushrooms after the first rain. All of a sudden, they can relate to the language. When they drive, when they take a ride, they see signs on the way, and all of a sudden, they can read the signs. All of a sudden, they can read the names written on the cars, the names of the cars, the brands, street signs. And I always make a joke and I say, they weren't put there now specially for you. They've been there all the time. You just couldn't relate to it. You didn't see them. If you know two languages and you have a different language as your first language, you will always prefer to read in your first language as if the second language is not there. And those who cannot read at all, they will refer to the pictures and not to the signs, not to the written signs. So removing the barrier, and I'm going back to the picture of the barrier, removing the barrier takes down the wall and helps the student to relate to the language. And of course, if we go back to reading as a tool, helps to better remember, helps to retain the information, etc., etc. So removing the barrier, taking down the wall, enable to enable the mushrooms to grow after the first rain.